America's wealthy have never been wealthier. They should pay their fair share of taxes. The big switcheroo should be reversed.
As we'll see, there was no economic switcheroo, but there is a big economic hoax, and Reich himself is helping to propagate it. Hello everyone, this is My 2 Cents. It's been a long time now since I debunked Robert Reich on universal basic income, but unfortunately, his knowledge of economics and government hasn't gotten any better. Today, I'll be refuting the idea that the national debt is only a problem because the rich don't pay enough taxes. However, before you watch this video, if you're unfamiliar with how the Federal Reserve System works, I recommend that you first watch Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money, the Biggest Scam in the History of Mankind. I'll be summarizing the important points about the Fed, but this is a much more thorough explanation if you find that anything I say doesn't make sense. Let's get into it.
The biggest untold story about how we pay for government involves a big switcheroo by America's wealthy.
No, the biggest untold story about how we pay for government is that ever since the creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913, the government pays for itself with money that it borrows from the Fed, which the Fed had printed into existence out of thin air. Then the government forces the American taxpayer to foot the bill, even though there is literally not enough money in existence to pay off the debt that the government has incurred. Sure, there are a few other steps in this process that the government has added to make it look more complicated than it is, but Reich is about to tell us that the government used to fund itself by taxing the wealthy, and now it funds itself by taxing the poor and middle class in order to benefit the wealthy. Garbage! Our entire financial system is a scam designed to benefit the government and a few wealthy bankers at the expense of the American people. In fact, the only reason this scam has persisted as long as it has is because of people like Reich spreading this misinformation.
Decades ago, wealthy Americans financed the federal government by paying taxes. Their tax rate was far higher than what it is today.
Yeah, we know. Back in the 1950s, the top tax rate used to be 91% and our country was prosperous. But then greedy rich people paid off the government to lower their taxes, and everything just became miserable. Do people like Reich do any research? Here are the facts regarding the good old days when the rich paid higher taxes. First, in 1955, there were 24 different tax brackets, compared to the 7 that we have today. After you account for all the inflation that's taken place since 1955, you'll find that the only Americans who actually paid the 91% tax rate were those that made nearly $3.5 million a year. And that was a marginal tax rate, so only the money that was made beyond that threshold was taxed at 91%. That being said, according to a study by the Congressional Research Office, the effective tax rate on the wealthy in 1955, in other words, what the rich were actually paying, was about 45%. Not that much different than what the rich are paying today, especially considering that the highest tax bracket today is anyone making $500,000 a year or more, much lower than the inflation-adjusted $3.5 million in 1955. But even putting all this aside, Reich and others like him continue to ignore Hauser's law. I've talked about this before, but for those who are unfamiliar, Hauser's law is a recognition of the fact that no matter what the tax rates are, the government has never successfully collected more than about 20% of the national GDP. Why is this? Well, as research from the 1950s and beyond shows, as the marginal tax rate increases, the wealthy tend to move their assets into corporate entities where the tax rates are lower, move their assets out of the country, or just stop being as productive. So get a clue, Reich. As a percentage of GDP, the government is not making any more money today than it was in 1955. And even if you drastically raise taxes on the wealthy, it will at best have no effect on how much money the government takes in taxes. At worst, the government will actually collect less in taxes once the tax rates get high enough.
Now, wealthy Americans finance the federal government by lending it money and collecting interest payments on those loans, profiting when the rest of us pay them back.
This is partially true, but Reich leaves out some important details. When the US government sells debt securities like treasury notes and treasury bonds in order to fund the national budget, it's not just wealthy individuals who are buying. Actually, it's primarily banks and other financial institutions who then turn around and sell those debt securities to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with money that's been printed out of thin air. When you realize that the banks are only a middleman, what's really happening is that the government is borrowing money printed into existence by the Fed with the promise that they'll pay it back later with interest. But since every dollar in existence comes into existence through loans from the Fed, there is always more debt in existence than there is money, guaranteeing that the only way the government will ever be able to pay back its debt is by issuing even more debt securities and borrowing new money to pay off the old securities. This is a Ponzi scheme that was doomed to fail from the moment that President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law. Wealthy individuals are not at fault for the fact that the government brought this scam of a financial system into existence through the force of law. Check out Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money if you'd like to learn more about how the Federal Reserve System works and why it's the biggest scam in the history of mankind.
As the debt continues to grow, interest payments are becoming huge. Taxpayers could soon be paying more in interest on the federal debt than we spend on the military or on Medicaid.
Well, no duh. When you have a financial system where there's always more debt than there is money to pay it with, the debt can only grow larger. Otherwise, there'd be no money and the system would crash. This isn't the fault of the wealthy buying treasury securities. It was doomed to happen from the moment the Federal Reserve System was created. And while the government can kick the can down the road through various policy decisions, it cannot stop the day of reckoning from coming when our entire financial system will collapse.
Interest on the debt is expected to hit $390 billion next year. That's nearly 50% more than in 2017, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Follow the money. Who's receiving these interest payments? Mostly Americans, not foreigners. And most of these Americans are wealthy. Investors who park their savings in treasury bonds held by mutual funds, hedge funds, pension funds, banks, insurance companies, personal trusts, and estates. The richest 1% of Americans now owns 40% of the nation's wealth, which is more wealth than the bottom 90% put together.
Here's the thing, Reich. All the people and institutions you've just mentioned are merely the middlemen that have been added to the system to hide what's really going on. Sure, wealthy Americans might be receiving interest payments on the US debt securities that they hold, but every US dollar in existence was at one point or another loaned into existence by the Federal Reserve. Therefore, at the end of the day, the wealthy investors are only in the middle, and every dollar in existence will inevitably make its way back into the hands of the Fed and into the hands of the Fed shareholders. The fact that the top 1% own 40% of the wealth is literally guaranteed by the Federal Reserve System. You want to complain about the fact that the top 1% own 40% of the wealth? Blame the government that brought this scam into existence.
Which means a big chunk of the growing interest payments American taxpayers make on the federal debt is going to rich Americans.
I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but this is guaranteed by the Federal Reserve System. Since every dollar in existence is loaned into existence by the Fed, every dollar in existence will inevitably find its way back to the Fed and into the hands of its shareholders.
Now keep following the money. One of the biggest reasons the federal debt has exploded is the tax cuts, starting with the Bush administration in 2001 and extending through Trump's 2018 tax cut, have reduced government revenues by over $5 trillion.
Citation please, Robert Reich. But okay, suppose I grant for the sake of argument that the government could have collected more than it had if there had been no Bush-era tax cuts or if the recent Trump cuts hadn't passed. I don't actually believe this, but I'll grant it for the sake of argument. This still wouldn't change the fact that under the current financial system, the government literally has to keep going into debt, since there's always more debt in existence than there is money. Every dollar in existence inevitably makes its way back into the hands of those that own the Fed. Even if there had been no Bush or Trump tax cuts, this reality wouldn't have changed in the slightest. At best, it would have meant that the debt wouldn't have grown as fast as it did. It's not a matter of whether or not the national debt gets bigger. This will happen inevitably under our financial system. It's just a question of how fast it gets bigger.
The Trump Republican tax cut will cause the debt to explode even further. Trump's own Office of Management and Budget predicts an added $100 billion a year in deficits over the next decade, adding up to $1 trillion of additional debt.
I'm getting tired of repeating myself. For those interested, check out the article on my blog, Why Tax Cuts and Tax Hikes Are Fundamentally the Same. Literally every legitimate problem that Robert Reich talks about in this video is one that was guaranteed to happen when the Federal Reserve System was brought into existence. And who brought it into existence? Oh, that's right, the government.
Now keep following the money. Most of the benefits from those tax cuts are going to the wealthy. 65% have gone to the richest fifth of Americans, 22% to the top 1%.
Yeah? Tax cuts necessarily lead to a bigger tax break for the rich since we have a progressive tax system. But I've already explained why the growing national debt is not the result of the rich paying less taxes.
So, you see the big switcheroo? The rich used to pay higher taxes to the government. Now, the government pays the rich interest on a swelling debt caused largely by lower taxes on the rich, which means a growing portion of everybody else's taxes are now paying the rich interest on those loans instead of paying for government services everybody needs. That's wrong. America's wealthy have never been wealthier. They should pay their fair share of taxes. The big switcheroo should be reversed.
Yeah, there was no big switcheroo. As I demonstrated, tax revenues have remained a consistent proportion of GDP no matter what the tax rates were. But there was a big economic hoax put into place back in 1913 with the inception of the Federal Reserve System. And so long as people like you keep propagating this myth that the rich are responsible for the growing national debt, no one will wake up and see the real criminal behind all of this. The government itself. Whew. Well, that was a complete train wreck. Before we go, it's time for a patron shoutout.
Hello everybody, I'm Zach.
And I'm Reaper.
And together we are the Dark Conservatarian. Conservative, libertarian, Christian, political, ranting, edgelord at your service. On my channel, where I mainly talk politics, you'll find me talking about a wide variety of subjects from abortion to gun rights, economics and immigration, religion, also other social issues. I have my own live show and also do lots of response videos with gaming footage in the background. If you like what you hear, then please check out my channel, subscribe, and hit the bell button. Thanks to 2 Cents for promoting my channel. Hope to see you all later, and God bless.
Please help out the Dark Conservatarian by subscribing to his channel. Also, at long last, you can now support my 2 cents on Subscribestar or Bitbacker. So if you're fed up with Patreon, you can go ahead and support me there. If enough patrons start moving their support to one of those platforms, I will be closing down my Patreon account entirely. Thanks for watching, and that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like, subscribe, and hit the bell to receive notifications of new uploads. And if you're a fan of my channel, please consider supporting me on Subscribestar, Bitbacker, or Patreon. For as low as $1 a month, you'll receive access to patron-exclusive videos, earn the right to participate in patrons-only live streams, join my patrons group chat on Twitter and Discord, and numerous other rewards. Also, be sure to subscribe to my gaming channel for a chance to hang out and chat during gaming streams. Uploads are every Thursday and Saturday, so stay tuned for more videos.